right? And this file, right, is where is contain all the stuffs that I will explain them in the next videos about Kubernetes. Here is where we define the user, the cluster, and something we call the context. And in that context, we define which user we want him to communicate to which cluster, right? So if we come here and type kubectl config view, right? You can see we have three parts here. We have the cluster, the context, and the user. And here we have the current context. Is Kubernetes admin, it is the name of the user, and this is the name of the cluster. So every time when I type kubectl, for example, git parts, right? So this commands or this kubectl interaction to which IPE server, to which cluster I am interaction with. I am interaction with the Kubernetes cluster. This is the name of the cluster that I'm interacting with, right? Because if I don't have this configuration here, that is reside under the home dash kube, right? I have to specify that manually. I have to specify the server. This means the IP address of the server, then the certificate, client certificate, and the client certificate and the client key, and then the certificate authority. Then I will be allowed to send a request to the IP server. So for security reason, the user that is interacting with Kubernetes must be authenticated and authorized. What that means is the current user must have a certificate. For example, if I create another user here, call it for example Abdlali, right? This one. And I want this user to communicate with my cluster, right? So what I have to do to define for this user, you have to define the cluster name and the context, and then give this user a certificate and then a client key. So once the user will interact with Kubernetes, then Kubernetes will say that Abdel is Abdel. This user that is trying to interact with me is the user that he is pretend to be Abdel. Because why? Because to have this client certificate and client key, the user or the root user or the administrator of the cluster must to sign it for you, to sign this certificate for you. You must interact or tell the root to sign you that certificate. And all of this I will explain it more in the next video, where we will talk about SSL or TLS in Kubernetes, and how all the components, the kube APA server, or the kubelet or the control manager should interact with each other in a secure way using the TLS certificate, and this TLS certificate will generate and sign it by the Kubernetes certificate authority. Nice. So now if I try to type kubectl git nodes, I have two nodes, the master node and the worker node. But as you can see that the status is telling that not ready. And what is that? Is because I have not installed the container network interface plugin. That I will explain it in the later videos. It is a very important concept that everyone must to know. So I go down here, then I will use the Flannel network plugin, right? So we go down here, then click and hit enter. As you can see here that there is a diamond set apps cube panel DS created. What means a diamond set? Right? There is the deployment, there is the stateful set, and there is the diamond set. Right? When we create a deployment, the bots, right, may be deployed only on, for example, imagine, let me explain you here and open another tape and explain you more. Then that we imagine this is our cluster, right? We have one master node, sorry, one master node, and we have two worker node. So let me come here and call it master, and then this one I will call it node 1, node 1, and then the other one I will call it node 2. Right, nice. So once I want to create a deployment, this deployment will have a replica set, then we'll have paths, right? And we assume that we have here, for example, 50 gigabyte, right? And the same thing here, 5 gigabyte, right? So in the master we have what we called the scheduler, and on the node we have the kube proxy and the kubelet. So the kubelet and the kube proxy, right? And here we have the etcd, the IP server, CD, the IP server, right? Then scheduler, controller manager, right? So in the etc, all the state of the Kubernetes is stored in the key pair values, right? So once I want to deploy, to create a deployment that contain paths, right? Then this state will be registered in the etc, right? Then the scheduler will trigger and will see that we have to create a deployment that have paths, and depend on the requirement of that paths and on the resource that we have. For example, we have deployment that has paths that needs, for example, 30 gigabyte, right? So we have two nodes here, right? Both of them have the resource that required by these paths. So the scheduler will ask the kubelet, or will go to the node, will go and check the nodes to see the resource required by the paths, and will look for the first node. Then it will find that this node have more than the paths required for resource. Then the scheduler will decide to deploy these paths here in this node, right? But this node, it will be free. There will be no paths here, right? But what if, for example, if I want to, for example, I will give you a scenario where I give you an example. What if I want to use the elk stack? the elk stack, for example.